Awareness of the challenges that lie ahead, and it must be serious because the two archbishops of Canterbury and York issued a statement the following day saying that we need to regain confidence in what we stand for as a nation. What are our values and our virtues that we can offer to each other and to the wider world? How can we give confidence not just to ourselves, but to our partners in an interdependent world? So, turbulent times. And in the midst of this, let's think about the cross. What can the cross say to us in our uncertain world? How can we give confidence to the families of Charles, William, and Emily that the decision that they have made today is the best decision, greater than any decision you can make in any referendum, the best decision that they could possibly make throughout their lives? What does the cross say that is relevant to us in our world as individuals, to our neighbourhood, and to the nations as a whole? Let me say at the outset that the cross has no middle ground. The cross of Jesus either has significance for everyone or for no one. It's too powerful in its symbolism, it's too universal in its reach, and it's too personal in its challenge to be only partially relevant. St. Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, "The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God." You cannot ignore the cross as a historical fact. There's more literary evidence for Jesus dying on the cross than there is that Julius Caesar lived. You cannot ignore the incredible loyalty that the cross commands, both personally and communally. Even today, Christians in the Levant have been martyred for their faith because they refuse to deny what IS have called the cross delusion. You cannot ignore its claims of eternal significance, and a sign of that was, as St. Matthew wrote in his Gospel, when Jesus died, there was an eclipse for 3 hours, signifying that incredible battle between light and darkness. In other words, after Jesus' crucifixion, nothing would ever be the same again, cosmologically, nor even personally for those who choose to follow it. So there are many angles that one could explore on the cross. And I want to show you this cross. I'll explain why in a minute. Just consider this symbol of the cross. We wear it round our necks as jewellery, yet of course it is a sign of cruel humanity. It's designed to be a symbol of shame, yet for Christians it's their one boast before God. It's a depiction of failure and of weakness, yet for those who believe it's a source of divine strength and lasting hope. It's a sign of isolation, yet it's the source of true identity. I've been amazed at how many soldiers in the armed forces, and I've served with them, I've given out these things, which are wearing it around my neck today, a combat cross. They wear that into conflict situations. Call it superstition if you like, but I think it signifies a barely understood but deep sense of need for spiritual identity and security. And now to this cross. This cross was made in 1942 in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And one of my predecessors as a chaplain in the Royal Air Force was preaching on this, the message of this cross, and was thrown into solitary confinement for doing so in the cross, in the camp, into the cooler, if you know the language. And this cross was made in secret. Their services were held in secret, but they were determined to keep having those crosses, those services, because it had a more lasting significance than the punishment that they were undergoing. The cross of Jesus for them and for people today is proof that when things go wrong, Jesus is still there. God never lets us down. He's always faithful. So the prayers that you've put at the foot of the cross today will be heard and will be answered. Of course, it's what lies behind the cross that is of most significance. It's all about Jesus, and the clue is in his name. The name Jesus, God saves. And you don't need me to tell you how much we need saving. Sometimes evil shows itself in a very stark, almost black and white manner. Think of Joe Cox, less than 2 weeks ago murdered as a member of Parliament, standing up for democracy. Or the week or so before that, the mowing down of 50 people in a nightclub in Orlando, Florida. This is deeply shocking to people in the West. We don't expect that sort of insecurity. But if you try living in Burundi or South Sudan, in Iraq or Syria, then that is a fact of life. Security and stability for many people in the world constitute a forlorn hope. And in your own families and communities, you may know that fight between light and darkness. On the one hand, acts of love, generosity, and selflessness, but on the other, the pain that is caused by broken relationships. And of course, in yourselves and in me, we may identify that tug of war between wanting to serve and yet looking after number one. Now, the presence of Jesus on the cross is proof that God did not leave us in this broken state. Such is the love of God the Father, who is sovereign over all. Jesus took on himself the punishment that brought peace for everyone. Hence the language in our reading of justification. It's the language of the courtroom. Just imagine this. Listen again to these words. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God and are justified freely by the gift of Jesus. It's like the judge in the court putting on his black cap and declaring the defendant guilty as charged, and then coming down and taking our place in the dock. Jesus pays the penalty of sin, he destroys the power of sin, and he breaks down the partition that is created by sin. And sin is very simply when we turn our back on God and our fellow humanity. Jesus literally crosses out the I, and he reconciles us to God and to our fellow human beings. Now, it took me quite a while to accept that. I remember it was about 35 years ago. I remember the moment when I was reading through the first 6 chapters of that reading we've had today, the book of Romans, because I didn't feel that I could accept the love of God. I wasn't good enough. But that's the point. No one is good enough, for all have sinned and fallen short. Sin is like an archery term, an arrow that falls short of the target. We've fallen short of God, but we are justified by the free gift of Jesus. And I remember getting through, and you may want to look this up if you've got a Bible later on, Romans 6:11 is the concluding sentence of Paul's description of the cross, and he says these words, "Even so, consider yourselves dead to sin, but alive to God in Jesus Christ." And I remember reading that, and the penny dropped. I had this overwhelming surge of peace, an incredible awareness of God's presence with me at that very moment. And I would like to say, it's actually not left me. That deep assurance that what Jesus did on the cross was relevant for me, but not just for me, but for the whole world. And I'm in the Royal Air Force. I really feel a sense of the conflict around the world that God is still sovereign despite whatever problems we have momentarily. And as Dave said, this church has been through so many kings and queens, so many conflicts, so many diseases, yet God remains faithful. So I wonder where you are with this. Just listen to these words, just draw into a conclusion here. This is what the Archbishop of Canterbury said just a few weeks ago in his sermon on the Queen's 90th birthday. The one who turns fear to wonder is Jesus. The story of Jesus shows us that God enters into the most fearful places imaginable in our lives, of sin, betrayal, violence, rejection, even death. And he turns each one of them from horror into glory. Nothing is outside of God's understanding. Nothing is beyond God's grace. Nothing is so broken that God cannot transform it. Now, we've only had limited space this morning to explore the range and the depth of God's grace on the cross, what it really means, particularly its place at the heart of history. But I hope that you've seen enough to recognize the amazingly personal invitation that God gives to each of us to follow Jesus Christ and to share in his wider work of reconciliation in our families, our neighborhoods, amongst the nations. It's both life-changing for us and it's world-transforming around us. Now, if you've already made that choice to follow the path of the cross, then just pray to follow it more and more day by day. Jesus said that, take up your cross daily and follow me. If you haven't chosen it, I encourage you to keep considering. Search these questions. They are desperately important. The cross is literally the crux of the problem. It is the source of the solution. And I encourage you to keep considering, keep questioning, go on an Alpha course. Don't forget, the cross is something that people will die for and gain life through. So be it for us. Amen.
Jonathan, thank you so much for explaining and exploring for us this moment that changed the world, that before it everything was pointing towards it. Since the cross, everyone has been looking back to interpret what it means to them.